Hello, one and all, and today in our glorious nation, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has taken steps to do his part to make sure that the South rises again by signing into law voter suppression with a controversial elections bill which restricts voting in Florida, and signed it into law this Thursday morning at the West Palm Beach Airport, in which only Fox News was allowed to cover the event. And it was also attended by members of Club 45, which is a fan club dedicated to our former president, the Orange Blunder, number 45. And it basically supports and believes in everything that he did. And Governor Ron DeSantis has definitely proved that he wants to be known as basically the 45 of local and state government. Now, this new law that he signed into being, it definitely came about because the votes went along party lines in the state house there and the state senate. And the House amended its version Thursday night, and that was done among party lines also. And they sent the final version to the governor, who advocated for the legislation even before it arrived on his desk. Okay? This bill, like Georgia, criminalizes giving food and water to voters in line, requires voters to show identification before casting their ballot, and allows partisan poll watchers during ballot counting to challenge every ballot to which they feel like they have an objection to. Which, no need to tell you, that is as dangerous as it comes, okay? Because that opens the door to basically just having all kind of security risk for many offices and many voting and polling places. But the most significant change in that state's voting rights affects mail-in ballots and drop-in boxes, which 1.5 million Floridians used in November. And see, this is where all of this comes into play, okay? The Republican Party knows for a fact that when it comes to voting, black and brown people tend to use early voting, mail-in voting, and drop boxes because it's a little bit easier for them to do it that way. This bill is one of those that wants to just attack any way that makes it easier for voters to vote. Many of the drop boxes in Florida were available 24 hours a day under security surveillance. Now the drop boxes are required to be staffed with an election worker at all times. So what does that tell you? That was once 24 hours will definitely be reduced. And I can see that going from 24 hours to maybe 8 hours or 12 hours. Okay, when it comes to requesting a mail-in ballot, now you have to ask for one for every election cycle. Used to be in Florida, it was every 2 election cycles. And they also added ID requirements and signature requirements in order to obtain a mail-in ballot, where there was no such mandate before. This law also undermines voter registration efforts by requiring a third-party voter registration group that must notify the voters they collect applications from that they may not return those registration applications on time, even though they are required to do so. What's going on in Florida is nothing more than true voter suppression. And it is aimed, and I don't care what anybody says, at black and brown folks. It is aimed at people of color. Republicans are always screaming about voter fraud and people committing crimes when it comes to votes. But every time this happens, and every time any instance of voter fraud it comes up, the perpetrator is someone Republican almost. Recently, Mr. Bartman, upstate, who was busted using his mother's ID, casting a vote for the orange blunder himself. This happened up in Ohio. He even told a judge he did it. Told the judge he did it because he wanted his mom to still have a vote, even though she was dead. And when asked if his mother was still alive, he lied and said she was in order to cast that vote. And yet this man only got 5 years probation. Whereas a sister in Texas who voted and didn't realize that she couldn't vote because she was on probation got 5 years prison time for a simple mistake. For a simple mistake. But yet, they gave her a hard time. And you know why that happened? It is simple as black and white. But back to voter suppression in Florida. According to a 2020 poll for the State Initiative Exchange, 70% of Florida voters supported using drop boxes for the elections. A 2021 Secure Democracy poll, which oversampled Republicans, found that 70% of Floridians wanted drop boxes to be both secure and accessible. Even 45 voted by mail in Florida, as did Governor Ron DeSantis, who has cast a mail-in ballot in 6 out of 7 elections from 2016 to 2020. But see, what happened in 2020 was Florida's history that the state Democrats were the majority of the mail-in voters, with 680,000 more absentee ballots than the Republicans. About 43% of Florida's 4.7 million residents voted by mail, with Democrats accounting for 45% of those mail-in ballots. And that also doubled the votes among black voters by mail-in. And that increased a large demographic. It increased it to more than 500,000 from 2016 to 2018. Black voters in Florida cast 11.4% of all Florida votes by mail-in in 2020, compared to 8.9% in 2016. And that is one of the big problems in Republican-held states. They don't want people of color gaining and having the vote lead. Republicans have a problem, and always have had a problem, with black folks voting, with people of color voting. They basically want what they had back in the day. True voter suppression. But not only Florida, okay? Texas also is actually working on their own portion of voter suppression tonight. They are right now in the state capitol in Austin, meeting to go over the suppression bill that they're coming up with. What does that tell you about what's going on in our country right now? That people are just really losing their minds and wanting to return the country to a time when it was truly hard for Black Americans and people of color to vote. They really and truly do not want our voices heard. Now, they out there right now in Texas having a showdown over state voting rights. And this bill is definitely Republican backed. It's called House Bill 6, which seeks to revise the state's election laws. And they say they want to ensure election integrity and security when it comes to increasing criminal penalties and criminal offenses. Okay? Which is just another way of saying we want to control the vote and make sure that you have as little rights as possible when it comes to coming to the poll. Now, in its current form, the bill in Texas would make it a state felony for election officials to send out mail voting applications to voters if they did not individually request the forms. Okay? HB 6 also requires people who help voters cast their votes to submit documentation describing why the voter needed help, even if the voter needs assistance due to medical reasons. The person assisting the voter is also required to submit their own personal contact information and must include their relationship to the voter. The bill also expands the access granted to poll watchers within the polling place. And it says that a poll watcher can only be removed if the poll watcher engages in activity that would constitute an offense related to election fraud. Okay? You know, it is amazing that states like Virginia, which is also getting ready to come up with its own form of voter suppression, Georgia, Texas, Florida, Arizona, all basically pissed off because the orange blunder did not return the glory. That people decided they had had enough of dealing with Republicans at the time and voted for a Democrat. But yet somehow that was a major problem. That isn't the law of the land. See, guys like Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, those are the guys who have been helping push this agenda, and they want what they once had before. Don't ask us no questions. We're going to do what we want. We're going to tell you what we want to tell you, and we're not going to give anything to the people out there. See, that's the problem they have with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their administration, because they came in trying to clean up a mess that had been put forward upon the people. They're trying to give people their voices back. And I'm not saying Democrats are perfect, but I'm saying that the Democrats are at least allowing you to have your say. The 2024 election is going to be rough. The little local elections that's coming up and state elections that's coming up, I think it's 2022, are going to be rough. But now is the time to start fighting back. Now is the time for you to stand up. Now is the time for you to pay attention to what's really going on. Those of you who say you're advocates for your children, This is also where being an advocate